Every day, season 2 is here now. Let's write letters to the White Tower. Come on, Matt, don't believe a word she says. Hey, hey. Letters and lies. Have you ever felt like no one cares about you? Maybe they don't even remember you? In today's video, I'm combining a few scenes to examine this feeling from a few points of view that we get. Perrin's reflecting on his relationships when he writes this letter, and then Matt is being abused in the most horrific way. But I'm not going to leave it on a downer. I'm going to talk about how important it is for our Two Rivers 5 to get back together and how beautifully this is explained here. Okay, ready? Let's get into it. I'm Koala Sedai, and I'm just loving breaking down season 2 of The Wheel of Time, scene by scene, and sharing it with you. The scenes we're examining today are from episode 1, and they're towards the end. I've kind of have to give up numbering the scenes because the way the show jumps back and forth, I'm now at, scene -1, at the second last scene that I'll be doing before the end of the episode. I'm doing a group of scenes here because I think that they make sense to look at these two together. I've already discussed Beltane in my breakdown on Perrin during episode 1, and what I really want to concentrate on here, rather than the Beltane lanterns, etc., is the content and beauty and slightly disturbing bits of the letter that Perrin wrote. It's so uplifting in so many ways, and it contains lots of foreshadowing. Then I'll reflect it back to show the level of abuse that Liandrin is just heaping onto Matt. I want to sit for a moment and just reflect on how huge the journey has been for Perrin so far. Now, I say this because we haven't had as much screen time with him as some of the others, and so it almost feels like he hasn't been a big part of the story. But when I started reflecting on this letter to write this episode, I hadn't really appreciated just how much he has been going through, and how much of that we have actually seen. Perrin grew up in a really closed community. Although he was from a large family himself, he wasn't the eldest, so he left home as a teenager to become apprentice to the village blacksmith. Now, in the show, this blacksmith then also became his wife. And now look, I could do a whole episode on the delicate situation of workplace relationships where the boss beds and marries a young employee, but I don't feel quite up to going there just now. I think I'll stick to what we're seeing on the screen. What I'm really looking at here is how tiny his world was until winter night. Additionally, even though he was childhood friends with Matt and Rand, he has a certain separation from them due to taking on a career and a wife so much earlier. Suddenly, Trollocs, and in what we presume is the first instance of him going into a berserker rage, happens, and he accidentally kills his wife. That trauma is like freaking huge. Next morning, he's told all this stuff about Dragon Reborn and having to flee, and bam, the world changes. Then, after Shadow Logoth, he finds himself in therapy with Ela and the two other An. He's unsure what to think about the Way of the Leaf, however, and there's this struggle happening inside him. On one hand, he would like to think that everyone could live in peace, but he's haunted by the ferocity of winter night and the need to defend. Next thing, he's in a tent being tortured by Valda, and no matter what Moraine said about the Yellow Sisters healing him, the internal scars were not touched. That torture also brought him to confront that those wolves really are aware of him and he of them, and there is something going on there, and that frightens him. Now, he was writing this letter just before he met Elias, so he still has lots more to deal with coming up. He held back from being actually violent at Faldara, and of course then there was the trauma of realising that Padan Fain had brought everything down on his village. We don't get to see how he moved from that spot to riding with the Shynarans, but it makes sense as he would hardly have wanted to go to the White Tower, and Moraine obviously considered him to be of no consequence now, and yet there was something that he could do, and after all, he had asked. So now he has a sword at his hip and is on a mission to save the world with a bunch of hardened soldiers. That is a lot of really different situations that he's been thrust into. We know how many things he goes through from the books, but I had missed how much we've already seen him go through. Subtle work there, Rafe. Now, the opening of the letter shows how open Perrin is in learning something from every person and situation. It reads, "They have this saying about swords and shields and enemy fire. It's very complicated and involves a lot of birds, but the basic idea is that if you stand alone with a shield, much of your body is still exposed. But if you stand in a group covering each other with your shields, nothing can touch any of you." Swords and shields certainly feature in episode 8, so we've got some foreshadowing here, and we clearly see there that when anyone is fighting alone, they're vulnerable, even to the point that Inkta tries to race forward and hold the passageway alone. Just think of how Matt looked standing there with all of those Shonshin coming towards him, and how different he looked once he'd blown the horn and he had all of the heroes arrayed behind him. So this letter is a great way of showing how Perrin is processing everything by writing. Personally, you might notice I love writing as a way of processing things too. But it also tells us what we're going to be shown during the entire season. The 5 need to work together to succeed. And really, now it's 6, as we have Wonder Girl Elaine joining the team. The imagery of standing alone with a shield strikes me as being a message specifically for Egwene, because she is going to be standing there alone shielding Rand, and she will be finding that things will really begin to fail when suddenly Perrin will come racing in carrying Uno's shield and help her. Now, while that doesn't quite constitute a group, I love that little bit of foreshadowing, particularly in comparison to when they're fighting the Shonshin at Atuan's Mill. There, they reach a point in the fight where the group of them draw together in the centre and attempt to stand back to back and be stronger together. Now, they would have been a formidable force, but not against the Damani. The next section of the letter says, "It made me think of us, all of us, and how together we face the impossible. But now, in our separate corners of the world, every day feels exposed." Which is a long-winded way to say, I miss you both. And Rand, Layla, especially now this close to bell time. So Perrin takes what the Shynarans have been talking to him about and turns it around to become a personal life hack. Not only that, but it is his Two Rivers friends that he wants to face whatever is coming with. He knows he's doing what he needs to now, but it doesn't feel truly right to be out there and exposed. And yet remember, Perrin is writing this when he's in the middle of a group of experienced soldiers who have just taught him about the benefit of being in a group and being able to look after each other by putting your shields together. So it isn't as though he is travelling alone completely, but without his friends. He feels that way. I loved how he names Layla in the letter too. He feels safe to say this to Nynaeve and Egwene because they both knew her well. A beautiful way to gently acknowledge that the loss of her is something he still carries every single day, and that gets confirmed further through this season as well. So putting Rand in the sentence with Layla shows that he's convinced that Rand is dead. Good job on that one, Moraine. The last part of the letter reads, "Let's promise that come next year, the four of us will celebrate together. Loial and I could meet you in Tarvalon, and if we're lucky, wherever he is, Mat will manage to stay out of trouble and join us too." Perrin is the optimist looking to the future. Let's promise next year. In season 1, he was asking Egwene if they would ever get to go home. Now, he isn't talking about home as a place, but about them all being together again. Home has shifted for him. Of course, we know he will go back, but we also know that it won't be home. Finally, I love that he acknowledges Mat, but we can see that same point of view on Mat that we're used to from the books. I love the way the show has depicted Mat and given us so much more of his point of view early, even though it's not been from his point of view. In the early books, most of our understanding of Mat's comes from the opinions that others have of him, especially because he spends so much of his time being Dagger Mat and kind of just out of it completely. Mat is often described as being lazy, immature, tactless, roguish, and brazen by many different characters in the early books. Not only do they describe him this way, but others he meets accept this as a fact because it's told to them. He certainly wishes to avoid his role in the pattern and would rather not engage in lots of hard physical work. However, he is undoubtedly steadfast, loyal, and won't shirk his duties even though he will grumble all the way through. He doesn't like authority figures. However, he will respect anyone who earns it. This is why he's so derisive of nobility, because he feels that people should earn respect. He enjoys gambling and drinking, but that's not something to hold against anyone. I mean, I'd love a night out drinking with Mat and Birgitte. Probably not the next morning, but at the night, I'd love it. So, while I love that Perrin acknowledges Mat, I felt so sad that it was said with the poke about hoping he can stay out of trouble. Compare that to the vision that Nynaeve has of Mat during her testing. She sees what she perceives as a best version of him, though there wasn't enough lace at the wrist for my taste. However, the last line of the letter for me made the perfect segue, taking Perrin's last comment about Mat around to him being in a cell with Liandrin. I'd love to know whether you think Liandrin is outright lying here or telling the truth that an Aes Sedai tells that is not necessarily the truth you think you hear. Is she able to say this because a dozen letters that have come that all mention Mat, which means that there were a dozen mentions, so that is not a single mention? Or is she just outright lying? while I find myself pondering that one, it doesn't really matter that much. But for show watchers, it sure was confusing, and I think that was the point more than anything. I know that Kathy, my non-reader friend who watches with me, said, "Hang on, she's lying." And then she didn't know what to make of that and where to take it, so it was just gorgeous. I didn't buy into it with her because I wanted her not to know before she got the outright proof with the Shonchan. So it was really fun watching that with her and watching her working through it. But the level of abuse that Matt has been copping all through season 1, therefore all through his life, and that's now continuing straight on into season 2, it is massive. Every new abusive situation just compounds on top of each previous one he's endured. I don't know if the early books made it as obvious that Matt was being portrayed through the eyes of others. Probably most of us see it quite clearly on a reread, particularly by reread 3 or 4, but in the show, it's obvious from the very first episode that Matt has been pounded with all this abusive, "you're no good" indoctrination from early childhood. Not only does she throw at him that he's not included in the letters, but she has to just twist that knife by saying, "I suppose it would be difficult to forgive you for abandoning them." Wow. Just wow. From a mental health perspective, the negative health effects of unforgiveness have been widely documented and studied. They include stress, increased depression and anxiety, social isolation, addictive behaviours, and even compromised physical health due to the stress it puts on the immune system. So Matt isn't even being given the opportunity yet to socially isolate himself, as he's being branded as unforgivable and locked away. Now, we know that he socially pulled away from everybody at the Waygate, but now he has no choice about this isolation. Solitary confinement is well known as an effective tool of torture. Confining someone while abusing them emotionally this way is extreme torture. Anyone that feels they can't be forgiven by others has no stepping stone to use to get out of the hole of depression they're in due to not forgiving themselves. It's very difficult to forgive yourself for any action or lack of action if you don't believe others will also forgive you. In fact, it feels like there's almost no point to forgiving yourself. So why is Liandrin holding Matt down in this deep pit of despair? Of course, the answer comes out in later episodes, and it's a very cold answer. Matt is simply a tool to use to weaken Rand. It's not even perceived by the Dark Friends or the Forsaken that they need to slow or stop Matt because of anything he might be able to achieve if they don't. That is what really twists deep in my heart for Matt. Yet, he manages to mask well in front of Liandrin and does not rise to the bait at all. Now, this shows how accustomed he is to this kind of abuse. He learned this at a young age. You can see it in Season 1, Episode 1, when he finds Natty outside on winter night. She's drunk, she's watching Abel, he takes her, he puts her to bed, and she just looks in his eye and tells him that he'll be a damn prick just like his father. Yet he refuses to respond, completes his physical task with her, and stays silent. But you can see a little sort of, I don't know, like a little something come across his eyes as he just retreats into himself a little bit, puts that mask on, and gets the hell out of that situation. This is really typical behaviour for someone who has been in a long abusive relationship. There's often a high level of denial that it is abuse and conditioned responses that are just automatic. It's a protective behaviour, a coping strategy, if you like. I'm not saying it's a healthy coping strategy, but it is a coping strategy. By not responding or inflaming things further, he hopes the abuse will just stop, and then he can pretend it hadn't really happened and move on to a distraction. While Liandrin is in the room, Matt is very careful to hold back his personal reaction and simply try to turn the conversation. So he's trying to deflect. He ignores the letter and what she said about it and simply tries to explain that he should be allowed to leave. He even does this in such a way that it appears that the letter and her harsh words didn't even affect him. But the moment that door closes, the tears begin to fall. Oh, what effort it took him not to show her the pain she had caused. That's another really common strategy that is used by someone who has been routinely abused over a long period of time. He only allows himself a moment for this, however. It felt to me like this is yet another learned behaviour, probably right down from childhood. One moment with a tear, then up, distract yourself. So while Egwene, Nynaeve, Perrin and Rand light Beltane lanterns for the ones they want to find their way back to them, Matt uses a lantern to light his efforts to escape and find his way out. We aren't clear at this point in the story if he wants to find his way back to his friends or just get out. But I loved the opposites of the use of the open flames in this little set of scenes. It certainly makes me wonder how I'm going to handle my feelings as Matt meets even more abusive people and situations and gets into relationships. I've personally always resonated deeply with parts of Matt's story arc because I have known the helpless feelings of being in abusive situations and none of my people around me, my friends or my family, understanding it. I wasn't quite prepared for how quickly and how universally Matt would be experiencing this in the show. Yet, when he lifted that horn and blew it and then said, "I remember," and turned around and said, "I'm a hero too," my little heart soared to such heights. And part of that was probably because I did not expect him to say, "I'm a hero too." But there was something so beautiful about, I'll get to that in some months, whenever it is I can get my way through to episode 8. Whew, lots to talk about there. All I'll say now is I can't wait to see where the show takes his arc. I have a feeling there will be a truly satisfying place that he will end up at within himself on the last season. Thanks, Rafe. You are delivering us so much depth of character in every single team. So, how did I do? Perrin's letter beautifully summed up one of the major themes for season 2, that together we are stronger. Perrin takes time to think of everyone that he loves, although his view of Matt resonates with those book character views of him being someone you can't trust to stay out of trouble. Season 1 saw a struggle with our Two Rivers 5 over losing Matt, and here it is seeping into Perrin's thinking at the opening, but the way this thinking is linked to the ongoing abuse he is suffering and has suffered all his life just rounds that whole story out so perfectly. I hope you enjoyed this. Did I miss anything? Is there something you notice going on that harps back to, reflects, or is even a flip on something that happened in the books? I'd love to know anything else that you can see in this. Please do also take a moment to like, subscribe, share, and comment away. I love hearing your thoughts. I've had some amazing discussions in the comments below in some of my YouTube videos, and I totally love it. So go for it. Go as deep as you want. I'll be back with more as soon as I can. All I can say is life keeps getting in the way, so I'm not even close to managing a breakdown each week. I can only say, therefore, that I will keep working on them as the wheel wills. Thanks for watching.